Evening and welcome. Thank you for choosing to spend your Tuesday night with us here at the museum. We're thrilled, and the museum is open, so maybe you'll have a chance to go see our new show, Sendak. Just making a pitch here. But I'm excited about tonight. If you were here for Renée's previous lecture on Modigliani, you know you're in for a treat. And if you don't know, I'm Angelica Danio. I'm Chief of Curatorial Affairs, Collection and Exhibition here at the museum and Curator of European Art before 1900. And that's the end of the title. But tonight is about Renée, and I'm delighted to introduce Renée Albiston, our Denver Art Museum Associate Provenance Researcher. Prior to her hire last year, Renée served as a contracted Provenance Researcher for our European art collection since 2017, and she did wonderful work on our collection of Impressionist, Old Masters. It was really a joy to work with her. Many of you, however, may know Renée from her prior role as Associate Museum Director at the Kirkland Museum of Fine Arts and Decorative Art, which she had served various other curatorial and administrative roles since 2011. Renée has been a frequent lecturer and participant in Provenance seminars, panels, and regional museum conferences, as well as Provenance methodology lectures and training courses in collaboration with various universities. Her research has appeared in multiple publications, including our Denver Art Museum reprint for the Naturist Muse catalog that includes our Hamilton collection of French Impressionist works as well as other Impressionist works in our collection, but also an early version of the Clifford Steele catalog, Raisonné. Her education includes degrees from University of Colorado in art history and history, where she was awarded multiple research grants for archive access related to the Monuments Men and World War II art looting. She also received a Master of Humanities degree from CU with a concentration in art law and policy, military history, and wartime looted art restitution issues. And this is really just a brief snippet of all the wonderful work that Renée has done and keeps doing as an integral part of our Provenance Research Department. And I'm thrilled because tonight, this disappeared, tonight we're going to hear about the fascinating story of our two Arcimboldo. And I was thinking wow, between Modigliani and Arcimboldo, the Italians are getting all the attention from Renée, and I'm thrilled. So without further ado, here's Renée.
Thank you, Angelica. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. My computer just went to sleep, I think. Here we go. Okay, so I'm here with the Madonna microphone to be able to walk around because I like to talk with my hands and just kind of be a little free up here. I'm looking forward to going over this lecture with you. I just want to talk a little bit about the Provenance Department here at the Denver Art Museum. The Provenance Department is a new department here for this institution. It was created last year. Senior Provenance researcher Laurie Iliff is actually in France right now at a conference. I was brought on last year, and then earlier this year we brought on Matt Coyle, who's here with us tonight, as our Provenance Research Fellow. And the history of provenance is really understanding the ownership of an artwork and making sure that it passed from one owner to another legally, that there's no gaps in its history, ideally, is what we like to look for, and that the object in question hasn't left its country of origin illegally. It hasn't gone from one owner to another illegally. So we've got wartime conflicts involved. We have different areas of colonial conflict that we look at. We really have four main focus areas in our Provenance department. Nazi-era looted works, areas involved in colonial conflict, as I just mentioned, art and archaeological objects, as well as native art objects that falls under NAGPRA. NAGPRA is the only federally mandated area within collecting institutions that has federal oversight. So we follow those NAGPRA rules very closely, and we take them very seriously here at the Denver Art Museum. So one of the objectives as a provenance researcher is to provide clear transparency on objects that we're searching for. We do that by putting objects on our online collections page. And one of the things that you want to look for is this known provenance. That's the work that I do, that Laurie does, and that Mac does that appears on our online collections page. We also provide information such as exhibition history, and then different dimensions and things about the artwork itself. This is really to provide a very clear picture, if you will, of an artwork so that others out in the world can understand why our painting or object is in our collection, who owned it. And that way it also provides an avenue. If somebody, an heir, does find a painting in a collection, they are able to say, hey, I have this documentation that this was once part of our family's collection, and we want to make a claim of returning that work. Now, it doesn't happen very often, but it also serves, this also is a preventative measure to serve against that too, to provide very clear evidence that we are in good standing with the objects that we have in our collection. So that's it on provenance. Let's get started on our main topic. So we're going to talk specifically about Arcimboldo's Allegory of the Four Seasons, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what these paintings mean, and then the ones that are in our collection. We will take a little trip over to the Renaissance era to get a little bit of history around that. We'll talk about Arcimboldo a little bit. We'll talk about the versions of this painting, of the paintings that you just saw. And we'll talk a little bit about the research that went into our paintings, and then we'll review the final research that was found from these from the research we did. So early Renaissance, 16th century, early 17th century, the Habsburg family was the ruling power in Europe of that time. They reigned over the Holy Roman Empire and ruled each kingdom separately. These monarchs were self-named as Holy Roman emperors and served as a subject matter for much of the artwork that was being produced at that time. Their wealth and patronage to the arts drove much of the emerging art and science and educational influences, styles, and philosophy of the time. The Holy Roman Empire was mainly set in Vienna and then moved to Prague, and the Habsburgs were spread out all through Europe. So you can see the family map here, how far-reaching this royal family went throughout Europe. Visual elements during this time really served as an opportunity to reflect new ways of thinking, especially around religion and politics, oftentimes overlapping. Royal courts throughout Europe had assigned court painters. Maximilian II was in Vienna, and he was no different. He met Arcimboldo when Arcimboldo came to Vienna in 1562 and was appointed court painter by Maximilian by 1562. By 1565. Arcimboldo ended up working as the court painter for 3 different emperors throughout Vienna and Prague, and we're going to take a look at what inspired some of his fantastical portraits that we've seen. So the royalties' influence at the time, their tastes, their ideas, all centered around representations of morals within the community, your standing within the community, and led to what some might call a system of correspondences. This system of correspondence creates thinking in parallels found in parts of the universe, especially around themes of harmony, the seasons, and the elements. The use of symbolism in artwork was heavily used as a device to convey these themes of morality and harmony. We also find overlapping beliefs around religion, science, and politics in popular thinking that includes the dark arts and the natural sciences. So this is when you start really seeing conversations happening and beliefs and really digging in deep to alchemy and wizardry, crystals, but symbolism being one of the main elements around this fantastical thinking at the time. So symbols that you may recognize or that you may have seen in some more traditional Renaissance works include things like this clear vase and lilies to signify purity. Thornless roses symbolize Mary's Immaculate Conception. Open books represent knowledge, and doves represent the Holy Spirit. So when you see paintings like these, you can be on the lookout for these kinds of symbols, and you'll see them tucked in here and there. Sometimes they're hidden. In the back of this one, there's also this cat hiding back here. So there's a lot of fun things to unpack with a lot of the Renaissance works at this time. So as the Renaissance artists of this time are evolving with these new symbols of correspondence and these new ways of thinking, they're being influenced by the fashionable influences of the time. Painters at this time start painting in what's called a mannerist style, also known as mannerism, which is characterized by exaggerated compositions, such as this one that you see, prominent visual elements, most often symbols that reflect morals and virtue. Mannerist artists preferred compositional chaos over the balance and clarity of earlier Renaissance paintings. So that's why you'll start seeing this evolution from more traditional works to, again, these sort of fantastical, almost surrealist in a way. This is a great example of a Mannerist painting. This is a painting, an allegory with Venus and Cupid. Bronzino was another court painter. And this is has some great moral messages in here, including this howling figure on the left here that's meant to evoke jealousy or be a symbol of jealousy. The boy scattering flowers here is meant to symbolize folly or pleasure. And then you'll see masked figures in here, and those signify deceit or fraud. So again, just some more symbolism to keep an eye out for. But you can see the composition of this painting is very different from the one I just showed previously, in that you have these different sort of chaotic scenes and subject matter, less traditional, and the perspective is different too. You see it's very flat. You don't have a lot of deep perspective like you do in some of the other paintings from earlier times. Also popular at this time were what were called grotesques. These are forms involving animal, human, or plants, and they were found in paintings, sculpture, architecture, and decorative objects throughout Italy before spreading across Europe. So some of these I'm sure look very familiar to you. I was recently at the airport, at the Denver airport, and over by the Southwest Terminal. I don't know if any of you have seen the gargoyles hanging over the, but they are, you can actually refer to them as grotesques now when you go to the airport and show off your fancy knowledge. Our last term we want to understand is grilli. Grilli is a term used to describe the composite creations that are made with artistic interpretation using unusual elements, such as this example here. All of these ideas are captured in the allegorical themes found in Arcimboldo's work. Usually a royal member of the family served as a sitter for the portrait, especially relating to the theme of magical thinking. The influence of the Habsburgs was so strong that the power of the emperor to rule over the physical lands also was thought to allow the emperor to rule over the greater world of the seasons and the elements. While all of these works were meant to be humorous, they also served as a visual way to show the symbolism behind the allegorical themes that were taken very seriously. Thinking back to the system of correspondence, the royal family was revered to the point of being seen as powerful enough to serve as the conduit between the earth and the universe, like the seasons and the elements merging together. And Arcimboldo's heads came to be known as composite heads, and began to get a lot of attention from royal courts throughout Europe. And these are just another example of Arcimboldo's version of the four elements. And the whimsy that is in his works is shown here. This painting was specifically created to be inverted to get two different scenes. So you've got a theme of morality, gosh, I just lost the word for it now. Gluttony, sorry, for gluttony. But then it can be inverted and you get this picture of this old man here. So it's, again, this very fanciful, comical way of looking at the life at that time through this lens of this system of correspondences. So the composite heads that Arcimboldo was painting at the time were likely inspired by elaborate food displays constructed by artists for banquets and grand feasts held at the royal houses at the time. Arcimboldo's composite heads were thought to have gone on to inspire composite animals found in South Asian Mughal paintings, such as the one you see here, which were created after Arcimboldo's earliest 1563 creations. So here in this camel, we find images of demons, embracing couples, rabbits, dragons, and even a Buddhist monk sporting an earring and carrying a staff. Specific to Arcimboldo paintings that we're about to explore, this particular allegory that we're going to look at of the four seasons represents the cycle of man. So growing from youth in the spring and aging up to old age in the winter, this is what these are specifically meant to represent. And again, the sitters for these versions we're about to see are reported to be the Holy Roman Emperors or other high-ranking royal family members. Royalty considered it to be an honor to sit for these portraits, and proudly displayed these paintings within their various royal houses. So now we're going to talk about the different versions of the four allegories of the seasons. This is part of what made this research very difficult. There are three versions of this set of four paintings. They are from three different years, and multiple copies were made. So I'm going to take you on the journey with me as we unpack all of these. But it was very important to understand the various versions and where they are today. They really held the key to the research that was conducted for Denver Art Museum's two Arcimboldo paintings. So we almost had to eliminate the other versions to get to the two that are in our collection. So the first version is the original version that was painted in 1563. There's only one set of this original version. Autumn is missing today. Nobody knows where that is. But two of the works are currently in Austria, this original set, and one is in Spain. This set was originally painted by Arcimboldo and given to Maximilian II as a gift in 1569. Sorry, I can't keep all the dates straight. So these were gifted in 1569, and then by descent were inherited by Rudolph, who was the eldest son of Maximilian II. Rudolph, after inheriting these, then gifted them to his uncle Philip II of Spain. And I point this out because Spain is an important player in what we're going to talk about soon, so just keep this in mind. And this series was seen in situ at Philip's palace up until 1636. There were yearly inventory records that were taken of all of the artwork throughout these palaces, and uncovering some of the publications that listed how many rooms, hundreds of rooms in some of these royal houses, and the lists of artwork and the depth of beautiful, amazing art that they had in these collections is just, it's unbelievable. But out of Philip, we have this set, and you can see here how they've gone through the family, how they stay within the Habsburgs, and we don't know where they went in between the last time they were seen in Philip II's royal house up until where they end up in Austria and Spain. But we know that they're out here today, so they are visible and on view. And I do want to point out that this is the only version that was painted on wood. All of the other versions are painted on canvas. Arcimboldo painted this particular set before being named court painter. So after his appointment by Maximilian II, his budget would have allowed him for more expensive materials like canvas and better wood for framing. The second version, which is our version, our Denver Art Museum's version, is 1572. There were two sets of these that were created. You'll see the two that are here in our collection. Spring is missing from that set, where we don't know where that is. And then winter is in the Manil collection in Houston. But we're going to come back to these in just a minute. And then the other set is believed to be in a private collection in Italy. There's not much research out there to understand where these came from, where the second set originated from and their travels, but we do know at this point that they're in a private collection. And our second set, like I said, we're going to come back to in just a minute. Our third version, 1573, there's 3 sets of these. One of them is in the Louvre, one is in a private collection in England, and the third set we're going to talk about in a minute because they kind of don't count. So this first set came about because Maximilian II liked his Arcimboldo portrait so much that he commissioned Arcimboldo to create another set in 1573 to be gifted to Augustus of Saxony in Dresden, Germany. A couple of interesting things we're going to talk about this set. You're seeing a side-by-side comparison here because this full set here with the garlands made its way to the Louvre in 1964 and was actually just completed conservation this summer. And this is the completed conservation of these 4 works. And you can see the garlands are removed. These were actually added in the late 17th or 18th century. So these were removed as well as a very yellow layer of varnish. Once that was cleaned up, they discovered some additional information or some additional subject matter underneath these garlands. So it kind of opened up the paintings, but it also really brightened them up by removing that varnish. I also want to point out the coat on Winter. The previous coat that Maximilian received has a stylized M up here that you can see. The ones that were commissioned for Augustus of Saxony have the Saxon coat of arms in there in the collar here that you see. So that's how we know that this set was made specifically for Augustus of Saxony. And we're going to look at this a little bit closer when we look at our paintings as well. So this is the only complete set that's currently on view. This is actually as they are in the Louvre right now. A colleague just went there last month and sent me this photo knowing that I was giving this talk. So she generously allowed me to share this image so that you all could see what they look like as a full complete set. Again, the only complete set on public view. The second set is signed and dated and comes from the original collection of the Winter Queen, also known as Elizabeth Stuart, wife of Frederick V, the King of Bohemia between 1619 and 1620. After the defeat of Frederick V at the Battle of White Mountain in 1620, Elizabeth fled Prague for England with her possessions, including this set, which remained in the family and descended down until the full set was sold in 2013 at a Sotheby's London auction to a private collector. So this set is now in private hands. The third set was mentioned in a 1674 publication, but has long been thought to be, quote unquote, a mediocre copy of the original. And they're not really part of the overall set. It's just a mention, nobody knows where they are, and nobody really spent time looking for them because they are such a third-rate copy. I guess it didn't warrant further investigation. So we got that one out of the way. So now we're going to go back to our version, to the Denver Art Museum's versions. And we're also going to look at the version of Winter in the Menil collection in Houston. As I mentioned earlier, spring is missing from this set, and so that just leaves us 3 that we need to look at, only 3. So understanding the Menil's Winter really helped lead to clues to our 2 Arcimboldos. Through research and reading material from Arcimboldo scholars and experts, I was able to find a quote that said that this set was possibly in a Spanish collection and came to France during the Peninsular Wars of 1807 and 1814. There was also a statement that there was an inscription in the upper left of the Menil painting reflecting invierno, or winter in Spanish, and we find that up here. So that further supports that this series was in a Spanish collection. And we'll also recall that King Philip II of Spain was gifted the original set, but it's possible he saw them originally in Prague or Vienna courts and liked them enough to commission a set before being gifted the original set, as you recall from his nephew. So there is a supposition going forward that our set was originally part of the Spanish collection. The only thing we have to go on are scholarly reports as well as this inscription on the top. But we're going to keep going with that. So we go into our versions. As a researcher, I just want to talk a little bit about process. It's not the sexy side of things, but it helps understand what it is, how we start researching these works. So one of the first things I look for, especially on paintings, but also sculptures and objects, is we like to see what's on the back. I'm more interested on what's on the back or the underneath than what's on the front. So we're looking for things like marks, labels, chalk marks, as well as stamps for import and export stamps. As you can see on this one, we found 3 labels that were actually in the object file. There was nothing on the verso of this one. And there was very little existing provenance. All that was in our records, in the public records, is that it came from Knoedler and Company in New York and was purchased by the Denver Art Museum in 1961. So it's not a lot of information, but it's enough to get us started. And then we look at our other Arcimboldo of Autumn, and there's nothing on the back, and we also have no existing provenance. So we're kind of working in 2 different avenues here, looking at 2 different works, but we know at one time they're connected. So we want to find how these 2 are connected. So first we start with what we know. We know that the Summer was purchased from Knoedler and Company. We go to the object records that are here in the museum. And in those object records and archives are a lot of historical information that is very helpful for us, including the bill of sale, which is a gold mine. This is what we want to uncover when we're going through records. So this is the original bill of sale from Knoedler to the Denver Art Museum. But what's crucial here is we're finding some information on exhibitions and publications. And these are going to lead me into my next step. I want to start looking into what those publications say. And then the best find is seeing that this is a collection, it came from a collection of Maurice Bridel. What's, to me, the most interesting part is the statement that the painting was acquired in Marseille shortly after the Napoleonic Wars. That says everything and nothing all at once. I don't even know where to go with this. So we're going to start with our stock books from Knoedler, which have been very helpfully digitized, which is a huge help for us as researchers. Old dealer stock book records and inventory lists are in various archives throughout the world, but they are even better when they are digitized. The Knoedler records are digitized from the Getty Institute in Los Angeles, so that makes our job a little bit easier. And here we see the stockbook entries for the 2 Arcimboldos sold to Knoedler by Mr. Bridel. We see that they were taken in 1960, and then here we see where they were sold. Here's where the sale to the Denver Art Museum in 1961, and then this MK Paris. This, as a researcher, I know that this is the Knoedler office in Paris. So I see that this goes to Knoedler in Paris in 1969. At this point, our 2 Arcimboldos are broken, they're split up. They were in the Bridel collection until 1960, and then they parted ways. This is additional dealer records from Knoedler that provide more supporting information, including this mention of Mr. Bridell. So with this name of Bridell, that's the avenue I want to follow, is who is Mr. Bridell? How did his family come into these paintings? How far back do they go? Did they truly purchase these at the end of the Napoleonic Wars? This is the most information I have, so this is the new path I'm going to keep following. Another source of information is tracking down old publications, like I showed you on that Knoedler invoice, the list of publications and exhibitions. Once you uncover those, then more things start unfolding. I find the 1954 publication it references, and in it I see where they mention the Arcimboldos, as well as the Bridell-Boisseau family, that these were in their estate in Lausanne, Switzerland. One of the things I like to call things that make research hard is when you find typos, such as the date of 1577, which is not correct for our paintings. Ours were done in 1572. Well, if you look at the black and white photos and take a closer look at the color photos, you can see how the serif at the end of 2 of 1572 could be misread as a 1577 if you're looking at old black and white photos. So that's yet another thing that has to be unpacked. Why did they say 1577? Well, because somebody looked at the photo wrong and put it in this publication. So we know we're still talking about our objects here. We find another exhibition an exhibition that's happening in 1954. Track down the exhibition catalog, and we see summer and autumn. We see that they're in the collection of NB, which is Maurice Bridell. We see they're from Lausanne, but now we have a date of 1573. So that doesn't help me either, but we know that these are my works that we're looking at. It's just these mistakes come up, and you have to be aware of a lot of different things like dimensions, things like media that's being used, the mediums that are being used. All of those things can be misprinted in publications and can lead you down the wrong research avenue if you're not sure of these other details. So you really need to have a holistic look at the objects that you're researching. Again, we go back to autumn. We have very little provenance or information here other than the Knoedler stock book. So in the archives at Getty, we also know that the Knoedler inventory intake stock books from Paris are also archived there. So after going through many pages, we find the entry where it was recorded, and we see that it came in July. From there, we lose track of autumn until about 1977. We do have good documentation of ownership from 1977 to the present, and we'll come back to that in just a few minutes. But our next steps, again, are to find out more about the Bridell family and how they were involved with the purchase of these works. So for that, we have to go back to the Napoleonic era. So the Napoleonic Wars were a series of battles throughout Europe with rampant looting of artwork from museums and private collections. These thefts finally ended in 1815 after the Congress of Vienna ordered the restitution of these works. Unfortunately, an unknown number of artworks were looted, destroyed, or lost, so it remains unclear as to how much artwork went unclaimed and exactly how much can be found in museums and private collections today. We do know Napoleon had a minister of arts who was charged with moving looted art from Austria, Spain, Italy, Poland, and Germany into the French state museums. Specific to our paintings, again, I mentioned Spain, we want to take a look at works looted out of Spain. So one of the key resources that researchers use are archived auction catalogs. Those are very helpful for us. They're digitized. There's a couple of different databases out there. Going through auction catalogs is one of the most tedious, time-consuming things because you have to use different keywords, search terms, there's different misspellings, you have to figure out which country your object may have been in. So I started with France. I went from 1815 earlier, and I was very lucky in that I found this auction catalog from 1815 that, look at the spelling, I wouldn't have found if I hadn't gone through different keywords of, this is spelled Giuseppe with a J, Arcimboldo D-O-I instead of D-O. But we've got our date. We know this is a tableau of 4, which is our set. We see the sale is in 1815, right at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, which is interesting. And then the seller of the auction, this is the estate of this gentleman, de l'Espinasse. Well, who's this guy? How did he get these artworks? So now I have to go figure out who de l'Espinasse is. So that is our next thread. Very little is known about this family. It was very difficult to find some things. This is one website that had a family tree. We do use a lot of we rely on the internet for a lot of our research, including things like Ancestry.com, but also ancestral records in other countries that are digitized. We use those quite often as well. So this was very helpful to help break down a little bit of the de l'Espinasse family. This was a noble family in France. And this is our auction seller. We see in our last family tree here. So I'm going to dig into August a little bit. There's no way I'm saying his entire name. I'm just letting you know that right now. And we find that August was actually in the military. He was stationed near the Spanish border. He fought during those time periods, during the Napoleonic Wars. But he also was an art dealer at the time. He had public sales in 1803 and 2 anonymous sales in 1808 and 1809, and then his remaining estate was sold at this sale in 1815. So that's interesting that he's been in the military, he's been stationed near Spain, he has means, he's an art dealer, and then we find his uncle, Augustin. Augustin is interesting. He is the artillery chief. He serves as the head of artillery for the French army. He also serves as commander for different military skirmishes that are happening around the Spanish-French border. And he's closely tied with Napoleon, who gave him several appointments and honors between 1804 and 1815. So what I propose as a theory of how these paintings got out of Spain and into France and into this collection, you have a lot of military folks involved here. You have the head of artillery here. How hard would it to bring a cache of artwork out of Spain and into France when you're bringing big, not truckfuls, but, big amounts of artillery going from one country to another? To me, that's a very easy road of bringing artwork into one country to another, too, easily hidden. And then your nephew is an art dealer. So why wouldn't they go to him? So it's, this is just a theory. I've totally made this story up, but these are threads that are connecting in interesting ways that sort of create this dialogue of how these works went from one country to another. I'm not saying in any way that these were ill-gotten. I'm just saying I think it's really interesting how all of these dots connect. So unfortunately, the answers to these questions require access to European archives if we want to dig in a little bit deeper. But at some point as a researcher, we have to decide when to say when. Resources are limited, both in funding and in time, so it's our job to do our due diligence as far as our resources will allow, and then we have to know when to stop. So at this point, I've gotten as far as I can go. I'm able to find out some more information about Maurice Bridel, who is really fascinating, actually. He was very big into the antiquarian community during his time in Switzerland. He is descended from a big family of printers and publishers. He worked as a bookseller, an antique dealer, and a gallery owner. And a lot of his objects actually you can find at auction, but to find information about the family itself has been very, very difficult and very limited. So a few final questions as we're kind of wrapping up the research we were able to do. We still don't know how the paintings got from Spain, if they truly were in Spain, to Paris. We don't know where they were between 1572 and 1814 when they were seen next in the de l'Espinasse collection. And assuming that the evidence is correct and they were purchased at that 1815 auction by the Bridal-Boisseau family, at what point before 1954 were these paintings split up? You'll recall the publications we found, the 1954 publication and the 1954 exhibition. Both paintings are together. They're both out of the Bridal collection. We can't date them any earlier than that. So we don't know when the set of four got split up. Other than what we know now is the two that are in our collection and the one that's in the Menil in Houston, and Spring, we don't know where that is. And that's still missing from our series. So our goal as a researcher is to leave no gaps in our chain of ownership. These paintings fell a little short, but we definitely uncovered more information than we had previously. So for those of you not familiar with reading provenance entries, this was the existing provenance. Remember, we started with Knoedler. Well, the rest of this information is what we uncovered just from starting with Knoedler. You do see the collection from de l'Espinasse by 1814, and if you are interested in reading provenance further, the two things you should know the most are semicolons and periods. Semicolons indicate a transfer of ownership legally, or that title is known, or bill of sale was seen. If you see a period, that is a gap in the ownership, and so we know that it's was sold at this auction in 1814. We have not documented evidence, but we have a lot of publications that repeat over and over again that this work was acquired by Bridal's heirs after the Napoleonic Wars. So it's worth keeping here in the provenance line, but we add a note here, basically saying we have no hard evidence, but we have a lot of supporting evidence to include this in our statement. And then, of course, we know that the Denver Art Museum purchased it from Knoedler because we have the stockbook records and a lot of supporting evidence for that. Autumn is a little bit different. We had no prior provenance. We started clean, but then we went back and found that it was part of that set sold in 1815. We've got the Bridals here, we've got Knoedler, and then we've got that gap that I mentioned. From 69 to 77, we just know it was in a private collection, but we don't know whose it was. And then our internal records, as well as what we've, the credit line, we know that John Hardy Jones was in possession of this work after 77, and then he did put it up for sale at Sotheby's, but it went unsold, and it was eventually gifted to the Denver Art Museum, very generously gifted to the Denver Art Museum in 2009. So I would encourage you to come see these beauties up on the 6th floor of the Martin Building. And I think we might have enough time. The museum's open till 8 tonight, and I would be happy if anybody wants to go up there and meet me. If we want to go up to the galleries, you can see these in person. They're very striking, and I would really love for you to go up there, because after seeing these just on the screen and then seeing them in real life, it's really, I think you'll be wowed. So I can take questions. If anyone live streaming has any questions, they can email the address here, Provenance at Denver Art Museum. And we have Mac here who's going to monitor the email for any live stream questions. And also Angelica, my lovely assistant, will be helping with any audience questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Renee. One thing I wanted to add so this, as she explained, they arrived from two different. One was a purchase in 61, was a donor. They came with the same frame. This is not as frame in them, which is a further evidence that these were at some point in the same collection.
Mm-hmm. And we have been in communication with the Menil, with the curatorial team at the Menil, and one of the things they have suggested doing is they're going to run their painting through the conservators at their museum and look at thread count and paint pigmentations. And they're going to report that analysis back to us, and our conservation team is going to take a look at that and compare it to our two Arcimboldos to really conclusively be able to tell if they are from the same set. Even though we suspect they are, that scientific piece of it is really helpful to make a definitive connection between those three works.
Yes.
Hi, Dennis. I'm going to let you talk in the microphone.
Does the Dallas in the Menil collection have the same frame as your two?
That is, I have not seen that it's the same frame, and the curatorial team has just seen images of our frame, so they're going to we're still in communication around that. And I'm glad Angelica brought up the frame, because that was a really key piece of our research. I didn't include everything here, but understanding the frame was a big piece of knowing that those two did come from the same collection. So yeah, sometimes outside verso images and frames can really be a key part of the story that you're trying to put together.
And I would say the invitation of Renee to go upstairs, in particular to see Autumn, because as you learned, the first series is missing Autumn, which makes this one the earliest surviving image of Autumn that we know of by Arcimboldo. Gotta get it right.
That's correct. Yeah.
Any other question? Yes.
You said that it's very much a theory that this thing was looted from a war scene from the Napoleonic War.
Mm-hmm.
What is your next step if it's pretty much confirmed that, yes, the Nazis stole this, the Napoleonics stole this, or whoever, and this is actually looted art?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. So what makes these so difficult is military skirmishes that are happening at this time. A lot of records are destroyed. Napoleonic era and Nazi era are two very different things. Nazi era, for better or worse, had the very good record keeping of the Germans, who were very systematic in their looting and really left a very valuable resource in tracking down paintings that were, or objects, any art looted objects, specific to World War II. Napoleonic era is very different. No record keeping. You saw from the map, all different countries. Things are going here, there, and everywhere. It would really take a lot of evidence for a claim to be made of an artwork stolen during the Napoleonic era. World War II has the benefit of claimants having potential photographs or other bills of sale or other kinds of records. Napoleonic era is so far removed from any kind of record keeping that it would be very, very difficult to prove a claim. And there really is no precedent for case law that's been set specific to Napoleonic era too. Nazi era, you have a little bit more case law that's been established, but Napoleonic era for the U.S. is kind of a non-starter around concerns around claims. I would say Europe has a little more that they have to worry about than us. So,
well, and I think I'm blanking right now, but I don't remember if it was the Netherlands or Belgium that actually came out saying we will not make any claim regarding works that may have been looted by Napoleon and his armies during the time. I mean, you make a good point about the record keeping, which will make virtually impossible. But also, I think we look back at that time in Europe. I mean, at which point, how far do you go back, right? Countries were moving. I'm Italian. Don't get me started on Napoleon. There's a few things I'd like to claim for our country back. But you account of, borders changed. I mean, at some point, Italy, the north was French, and then it was German, then it was Austrian. The southern Italy was Spanish, then it was the Normans in Sicily. So European history, as a lot of history, is complicated the farther you go back, especially with borders and what country was at the time. But this consideration apart, there's the actual evidence A that would be virtually impossible to obtain. But that's a very good point. Any
other questions? Yes?
Wait.
We're going to make Angelica jog over in her...
Good. My gym for the day.
Get your steps in, Angelica.
I know. No gym for me tonight.
Thank you. What law would govern who can make a claim, how long it takes? Is there international law, local law? How is that determined?
So again, that's really specific to the time period you're looking at. Nazi era, again, is handled very differently. Claims like that are handled. There are attorneys that specialize specifically in World War II looted art restitutions. The laws are very different here in the States versus Europe. You really can't even compare the two. There's no established statute of limitations for Napoleonic era. Now there is. Nazi era is a whole other conversation. There are some things in place around statutes of limitations to make a claim. But specific to this, there's really nothing legally in place that would either encourage a claim or prevent a claim from happening. It's just not bubbling up to the surface as much as you see the other collecting areas that I showed you earlier that we do focus on. Those are areas of concern for us. I don't know that I fully answered your question, but basically, there's no laws for Napoleonic era. Again, there's just no precedent that's been set because there really has been no claims brought against, here in the States, brought against a claim of ownership from a Napoleonic era looted work.
And with Nazi era, we have proof of sale or acquisition under duress. Those are well documented. Napoleonic era, we don't have the people anymore to say that Lespinasse, for instance, received that willingly from the owner that decided to make a gift. The verbal, we use in Nazi era also likelihood, and there's a number of circumstantiary evidence that will bring you to say, no, this was under duress. The price of the sale. In cases like this, it goes so back in history that all of those, even circumstantial evidence, is just not available.
Thank you, Angelica. That was a very elegant answer.
No, and also legislation that I would say, just recently, if you Google it, there's an article, California, for instance, was changing laws to help out the claim of Jewish heir that lost in the court with a European institution. And the state of California changed the law to facilitate the reopening of the case. So, I don't know exactly myself how internationally that will play out. But these are big debates that are transnational, and we welcome that conversation to do the right thing at the end.
Mac, do we have any online questions? Okay. Well, if there are there any other questions from the audience? If not, I would love to meet you up on the 6th floor and just give me a few minutes and I can meet whoever up there who would like to go. And I want to thank Angelica for having the vision to understand that provenance is so important, and also our provenance department as a whole. We work very, very hard to bring these objects closer to visibility for the public to understand their ownership. And we feel very deeply and very connected with the works that we're researching. So
And thank you, Renée.
Yeah.
Renée and Mac and Laurie Eilif, who is in France right now, part of a panel on provenance, because this is a work that takes every energy. I mean, all research takes a lot of energy, but this, as you can see, you're digging into different, there's not an easy book on the history of art or catalog by a preeminent scholar you can sort of lean on to. This is really raw research out of the intuition of our three provenance research members. And sometimes, you hear on the news, you see things, but what you don't see is really the hard work of the team that works hard to unveil the history of this object. So thank you for your contribution.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And you had a question,
Thank you.
ma'am?
I'm just going to say a comment that it does make me appreciate the works, not only hearing all the work that goes into it, the study that goes into it, but I wouldn't be able to, repeat even 1% of it, but I have this impression now of like all the historical aspects that went into, where and how it got first commissioned, and then who was interested in it, and how it went around, to these different countries. So it really adds to my appreciation, I'm sure everyone's.
Thank you for saying that. And that is important. The context is very important to understand, as you said, how they traveled, why the subject matter is important. You have to understand all of these. It's not just research. It's a lot of historical knowledge, military history knowledge. All of that comes into play. So,
actually, that seems like a very appropriate place for me to interject my question here, which is, you've mentioned the Second World War, you've mentioned the Napoleonic Wars. Are there any sort of other major conflicts that lead to these sorts of vagaries in ownership?
Oh, sure. Just Iraqi museum looting in 2003, and anything happening, in that area. You've got a lot of objects leaving their country of origin at that time. ISIS was known. I don't know if anybody recalls the big Buddhas that were blown up. They were known to take a lot of these works and sell them on the black market to raise funds for arms. And so they end up in the ether, and they show up at auction, or they show up, and that's where you get into these problematic histories and these problematic pieces of ownership. Is exactly that. There's so many military based things that have happened that has resulted in artwork coming into the market that shouldn't have left their country or shouldn't have left their owners. And it's not just Napoleonic or Nazi or Middle East. It's global. It doesn't just end in one war or end in one country. And it's ongoing now. We are getting notices now to keep an eye out for Ukrainian artworks that are being looted currently, that are starting to find their way onto the black market. So, yeah. But that's why we're here, to make sure that they're reunited with their rightful owner. So, okay. We'll wrap it up. I'll see you on the 6th floor, or if not, thank you for coming. Thank you for my online audience. I have family who's watching, and have a good night.